Welcome to the Horror Tunnel channel, where I share interviews I've conducted with people from different parts of the world and their horror stories. Enjoy listening. Hello, my name is Bugra. I'm a 28-year-old guy. I'm going to tell you about a terrifying moment that I've never been able to forget in my life. I'm a guy who was born and raised in Turkey. When I was born, my mother passed away, and my father, unable to take care of me alone, left me to my grandparents and went to another city. I've never seen either my father or my mother. I grew up with my grandparents until I was 18. Then, with the support of my uncle, I was sent to my relatives in Germany. I didn't know my relatives at all. As soon as I arrived, they placed me in a factory that provided training in spare parts. This place became both my job and my home for a full 3 years. After 3 years, due to the factory's financial losses, I was laid off. At 21, I found myself all alone on the streets of a foreign country. Germany is a very cold place. Therefore, I urgently needed to find a place to stay and a job. At first, I thought of my relatives and immediately asked them for a place to stay. However, they rejected my offer and instead said they would help me find a job. And so they did. 2 days later, they told me they had found me a new job. Without wasting any time, I went for the job interview. They said I would work as a guard in the section where the electrical panels of their power plant were located. However, they said this panel was not inside the power plant, but rather on top of a mountain 16 kilometers away. At first, I hesitated a bit, but I had no other option than to accept. So I did. I grabbed my bag and set off with the company's vehicle the same day. I was being driven by an old man named Orhan, who was also Turkish. We chatted a bit on the way. He told me that I would be alone there, but they would regularly bring me necessities like food and water once a week. Honestly, since coming to this country, I haven't been able to socialize at all, but working in a place like this was better than sleeping on the streets in a place where I didn't speak the language well enough. After a journey of about 6 hours, we arrived at a place in the mountains. Orhan opened the gate, which was locked with padlocks and surrounded by barbed wire, and drove the vehicle inside. When I got out of the car, the sounds of the wind gave me shivers. The weather was quite cold. We carried my bags and the food crates from the vehicle into the building. Then we went downstairs and turned on the lights and heaters. I learned the location of the dormitory and the cafeteria. Orhan said he would come by occasionally over the next few days to help me learn the job. During this time, he was supposed to stay at the power plant. After he had taught me enough about the tasks, he bid farewell and headed towards the vehicle to go to the power plant. I accompanied him to the car to see him off. When we stepped outside, my face felt frozen. It was completely dark, and there was a disastrous snowstorm outside. Without wasting time, Orhan got into the car and set off. After seeing him off, I closed the gate behind the barbed wire and went inside. My bones felt frozen. I immediately bent down near the heater and warmed myself up. I was very hungry. I went to the kitchen and opened the crates to prepare something to eat for myself. The crates were almost full of canned goods and food. I picked out a few cans for myself and started to fill my stomach. The only sound I heard while eating was the howling of the wind outside. Lost in my own thoughts, I filled my stomach, thinking that if someone attacked me here, nobody would hear a thing. And then I entered the dormitory and lay down in my bed. I closed my eyes and waited for sleep to come, lost in daydreams. About 10 minutes later, I heard a sound coming from the corridor. It sounded like the noise a train makes on its tracks. This sound lasted for about 5 to 6 minutes and then stopped. I thought to myself that maybe a door was left open, maybe a chair had been blown by the wind, and I closed my eyes again. However, when the same sound was heard, a bit longer this time, I got out of bed, put on my slippers, and went out into the corridor. There was nothing in the dormitory corridor. I turned right and went towards the corridor where the cafeteria was located. As I entered the corridor and turned my head to the right, I was frozen in shock. The shopping cart from the cafeteria was standing in the middle of the corridor. What surprised me was that the cart had come out of the room that I had closed. I stood up and turned off the television. When I went back to dispose of the bloody boots I had placed on the ground, I couldn't find them there. I was losing my mind. I had just placed those old, worn-out boots right beside me. Even if someone were to take them, I could easily hear even the slightest sound. It was midnight. I needed to sleep now. I rushed to answer it, and there was a panicked voice on the other end. "Hello, Bugra. Are you asleep?" the voice said. I replied in surprise. "No, but who are you?" The man, out of breath, said, "I'm Sahin, the external guard of the power plant. Orhan hasn't returned to the power plant after you left. Something might have happened to him on the way. I'm coming to pick you up with the vehicle now. Let's check the other back road together. Get ready immediately." I hung up the phone and quickly put on thick clothes, grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, and went outside. The outside was covered in snow. As I walked outside the barbed wire, the young man who had called me arrived, and I immediately got into the car, and we set off towards the other road. After a few kilometers, we noticed tire tracks on the road. The tire tracks veered right and left on the road, and then flew off the left side of the median. We stopped the car immediately, turned on our flashlights, and shone them down below. Our worst fears were confirmed. Orhan's car was lying upside down below, having flipped over. We carefully started descending down the road, with car parts and Orhan's clothes scattered everywhere. As we approached the vehicle, I spotted a pair of boots on the ground, each containing severed feet. The grim part was that these boots were the same ones I had seen inside the building just moments ago. I didn't make a sound and circled around to the other side of the car where the real shock awaited. Poor Orhan's arms, legs, torso, and even his skull were severed from his body and scattered around. We were both in shock, staring at each other. Then the young man turned to me and said, "Run, go back to the power plant. Keep an eye out there. I'll call the police. Direct the arriving teams to this road." I ran the 2 kilometers back to the building and went inside. Soon after, the police and ambulances arrived. I directed them to the road where Orhan had the accident. After the teams left, I collapsed into the armchair in the rest area and let out a sigh. I was on the verge of fainting from exhaustion. I stretched out my legs and leaned my head back and soon drifted off to sleep. Hours later, I woke up to the sound of the bell ringing. It was already noon. I quickly got up and opened the building's door. There stood the young man from last night. He greeted me and entered. Then he looked at me and said, "Yesterday was quite exhausting." I asked about the situation of the events. The young man sighed and said, "They think a wild animal, probably a bear, tore Orhan apart after the accident, but no traces of claws were found. I was deeply saddened by this situation. I lowered my head and said, "I think I sensed Orhan's death beforehand." The young man reacted with surprise. "How so?" he asked. I bowed my head and said, "Yesterday, I found 2 bloody boots outside the dormitory. Then they disappeared. I even found a cassette, a video of 2 young people committing murder." I showed the video to him. The young man was shocked. "Just as I suspected," he said. I asked what he meant, but he brushed it off, saying it wasn't important. After much insistence, he began to speak. "Look, don't let what I'm about to tell you scare you. There were a young girl and her boyfriend who were working as guards here. Then something happened, and these 2 lost their minds and started kidnapping hikers, campers, etc., and locking them in the basement. Then they tortured and killed them one by one. The incident came to light later. They were caught. The ones in the video are that girl and boy." He paused for a moment, then said, "Let's eat something. I need to go." We opened a can each and filled our stomachs. Then he left without wasting any time, got into his car and drove off. What he had told me had shaken me to the core. I wasn't easily scared normally, but the events had made me a bit tense. I went outside and patrolled before it got dark. Just as I was about to enter the building, I heard a voice from the forest that sounded like a woman's. It could have been a wild animal, or maybe not. I quickly entered and closed the door, then headed to the rest area, where I sat down and stretched my legs. While watching TV, my eyes caught something in the corridor. It seemed like someone had just dashed past the door. I got up and walked quietly towards the door. When I looked down the hallway, I saw something terrifying staring back at me. A small figure, about 1 meter tall, bald-headed, wrinkled face, and eyes completely white. Just then, the lights in the building went out, and the creature at the end of the corridor started rushing towards me. In the darkness, I couldn't see it, but I could hear the sound of its bare feet hitting the tiles. Filled with terror, I quickly retreated into the rest area and shut the door behind me. I was out of breath, my heart pounding with fear. The dreadful creature pounded on the door and locked it firmly. I leaned against the door, holding it with all my strength. Suddenly, I felt a slight breeze on my face, as if something had come right up to my nose, and I could feel its breath on my face. Fear engulfed me entirely. Then a strange voice from outside said to me, "How beautiful the darkness is." Trembling with fear, drooling from my mouth, death is inevitable. Tears streamed down my face. I was crying. After a while, the pounding on the door stopped. At least, the silence somewhat comforted me. At that moment, I heard a car pulling into the building. It was a relief. Someone was knocking on the door. I had to go to the entrance of the building to open it. First, I slowly opened the door of the room, looked around to see if anyone was there, and then ran to the building's entrance. I opened the door, but there was no man or car in sight. Moreover, the gate of the wire fence was closed. I muttered to myself, "Have I gone crazy?" The outside was silent. Then I heard sounds coming from the wires next to the building. When I turned my head and looked, I screamed in horror. Orhan's upper body was leaning against the wires, banging on them with his hands to make noise. His lower body was twisted around nearby. I closed my eyes and heard a terrifying scream. It sounded like a deer's scream. I ran inside, went into the control room, grabbed a stick and a flashlight, and then hurried downstairs. While searching for the switches, I began to hear the laughter of the girl from the video echoing in my mind. Her laughter seemed to resonate within my brain. Finally, I found the switches and turned on the lights. Now, I felt a bit of relief. At least I could see properly. I climbed the stairs comfortably. When I reached the upper floor, I heard a whisper in my ear. Go to the kitchen and cut your arm. Fear once again enveloped my entire body like a vine. I couldn't make sense of what was happening to me. Just then, I felt a hand touch my back. I quickly turned around, but there was nothing there. My entire body started trembling again. I leaned against the wall and started walking aimlessly towards the control room. With cautious steps, I reached the control room and closed the door behind me. Then I went to the lobby and washed my face. After turning off the tap, when I looked up in the mirror, I noticed something standing behind me. Its appearance was horrifying. It resembled the face of a woman aged 150, with green eyes and dressed in pitch black. I quickly turned around to look at it, but it disappeared after a second. I was on the verge of losing my mind. I immediately grabbed the phone and called the main control center, telling them to send a team urgently. The person on the other end asked me what was happening, but I shouted, "I told you to send a team urgently." They said a team would arrive within 15 minutes and hung up. I started praying continuously for them to come quickly. The minutes seemed to drag on endlessly. I left the control room and started waiting outside. After a while, I noticed the headlights of a vehicle approaching from afar. I was ecstatic with happiness. Impatiently pacing back and forth in the garden, I glanced at the building. At that moment, a terrifying detail caught my attention. Horrifying silhouettes were staring at me from the windows on the upper floor. Terrifying face beings were standing in all the windows. I was terrified. Time seemed to stand still. The whistling wind from outside only added to my fear. I glanced at the building, checking if the silhouettes were still there, but none of them were. I turned to the young man and said, "Take me away from here." Despite his objections, I insisted that I was quitting. They tried to calm me down, but I was yelling at them in anger. Finally, the young man couldn't take it anymore and said, "Then Belgin Hanim, stay with us tonight. We'll take you to the main control center when we find someone new." I reluctantly agreed. The woman named Belgin was new to the job. We escorted her inside the building, and I began to show her around. The woman pulled me aside and said, "Forget about describing the building now. Tell me everything that happened here." With astonishment, I recounted the events from the beginning. The woman listened attentively from start to finish and said, "So it's true." Curious, I asked, "What's true?" Taking a deep breath, the woman said, "Didn't you notice? This entire facility in Germany is mainly staffed by Turks. I started working here today. Throughout the day, everyone was talking about this place. This building is very problematic. Staff members can't last more than a day or two." She continued, "Two lovers who were working here suddenly turned into serial killers. There have been 7 suicide cases in this building alone. People losing their minds is not uncommon. Downstairs, the staff constantly talked about you. They even made bets on how long you would last. This place is really not normal." Shocked, I asked, "So, what happens now?" The woman looked around and said, "Let's explore the entire building together." "Okay," I replied. We linked arms and went up to the upper floor. We began opening the rooms one by one. Most of the rooms had machinery inside. Then we descended to the basement. I didn't know much about this area. As soon as we went down, I noticed a large electrical panel. Apart from that, the corridors were dusty, and I saw a single pillow. When we entered the second room, we saw chains attached to the walls with hooks and a wooden chair. In the third room, we noticed a large pile of rotting flesh on the floor. It was unclear whether it belonged to a human or an animal. We quickly closed the door. The woman looked at me and whispered, "This building is truly cursed." Suddenly, we heard a loud laughter coming from outside the building. The woman turned pale with fear. I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, demanding, "Tell me what's happening." She stuttered, "I saw something just now." It looked at me and said that this place is the devil's den. It wants me to cut off your arm. I immediately grabbed the woman and took her upstairs. I sat her down in the rest area upstairs and told her to wait there. I said, "I'll get you some water. Wait here." I went to the kitchen and started filling a glass with the water. Then I noticed a noise behind me. When I turned my head, I saw the woman entering the kitchen. She grabbed the knife on the table and stared at me with a blank expression. Shocked, I exclaimed, "What are you doing?" The woman murmured, "Bring your arm. Otherwise, they'll destroy both of us." I yelled at her, "Shut up! Are you out of your mind?" She quickened her pace and raised the knife, screaming as she ran towards me. With fear and reflex, I pushed the table towards her, making her fall to the ground. Then I rushed out of the kitchen and locked her inside. Meanwhile, I noticed a small, white-eyed, bald figure running towards me in the corridor. I immediately threw myself outside and closed the door behind me. I was all alone in pitch darkness, crying uncontrollably out of fear. I heard the kitchen door open. I ran to the wire fence, turned around and looked at the building. The woman opened the door, saw me, and yelled, "Come here, you scum!" then started running towards me. I quickly put the padlocks on the wire fence door and started running without looking back. Breathlessly, I made my way to the main control room. The security guard was surprised to see me at the door. "What are you doing here?" he exclaimed. "I'm quitting," I said. The man let me in, and I slept in the main control room that night. The next day, I presented the events to the managers in detail, both verbally and in writing. The woman who attacked me had lost her sanity and was still threatening to kill me. That day, I collected my belongings from the workplace, and they dropped me off in the city. For a few weeks, I tried to find other jobs, but I couldn't find any, nor could I escape from the nightmares. My mental state was completely shattered. So, I decided to return to Turkey. I bought my plane ticket and returned to my country. I went through great difficulties in my own country for a while, but over time, I managed to sort everything out. However, I couldn't escape from the nightmares. Every time I fell asleep, I started to see that power plant. Several years passed, and I turned 27. I went to a psychologist to pull myself together, but I couldn't find a solution. Later, upon the insistence of my friends, I went to a witch doctor. I explained the situation to the witch doctor. The witch doctor put a bowl in front of me, filled it with water, and told me to put my hand into the bowl and close my eyes. So I did exactly as the witch doctor said. After a while, the water in the bowl started to boil and burned my hand. I pulled my hand back in pain and looked at the witch doctor, saying, "My hand got burnt." The witch doctor looked inside the bowl and said, "Get up and leave. I don't want any money from you." I asked why, and he gave me a stern look, saying, "Whoever entered my house with you is an infidel." Even the jinn smelled the scent and fled the house. Whether there is magic on you or an evil spirit, it's not clear. Whatever is interacting with you is very dangerous. Please leave. Since that day, my nightmares continued for years. I still don't know what will happen to me. The only thing I know for sure is that I will never forget what I experienced. Our story ends here, friends. If you have any stories you'd like us to share, feel free to reach out to us through the comments section. Thank you.